Sandra Otto, transformational guide who draws a 30 years of experience as a coach and spiritual teacher. Apart from New Zealand, Sandra has lived, studied, and worked in Australia, France, Italy, Germany, South Africa, and facilitated learning, innovation, and transformation in many more countries across the globe. So put your hands together for Sandra.
Hello, everybody. So yes, I'm here on Waiheke Island, a beautiful kind of mix of a Mediterranean island and Pacific island. Very beautiful. It's the middle of the night. It is about 10 o'clock at night. So I'm probably the furthest ahead of all of you. And when it comes to the disc profile, I'm an I. I'm so much an I that I'm almost jumping off the chart. So I hope that will make for a good session. And I will speak to you today about Indigenous wisdom. And I have two kind of professions. One is I work in the future of work, and I'm a consultant that helps changing the culture from a not so happy sometimes culture in the corporate world to a much happier humanistic culture where people can connect, where people can trust each other, and then really do amazing things together for the future. And my second profession is that I'm a corporate spiritual medium and a mentor. So I'm a medium, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later and how that ties in with Indigenous wisdom. So as Kaushik was saying, I'm having this very funny profile that I would be very, very much in the business side of things, strategically and operationally, because I've worked in the SAP software ecosystem for a very long time. And I'm also in a very extremely far out in a cosmic spirituality. And we'll talk about that a little bit because that ties back in with Indigenous wisdom. But the first thing I wanted to go through three different things is why is Indigenous wisdom important? And then maybe go through some principles of core shamanism, just as one example of how we can try and grasp a little bit more what Indigenous wisdom is about. And then how could you apply it today, or how do I apply it today in reality? So we can see how to really integrate it. So I have a few slides just that will help you to maybe memorize some of the key concepts. The first thing I wanted to tell you is something I only found out about a year ago and that I found totally fascinating. And I'd love to know who knows about the weird people, the concept of the weird bias or the weird people. And I put, it's literally like in an acronym, weird people. And maybe put your thumbs up so I can see a little bit if on the gallery view, if anybody knows it. And it doesn't look like anybody does know it. So I will actually share my screen and show you a slide where you can actually see what weird stands for. And weird stands for, so this is some anthropological research, and it's very interesting because weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. So as you can hear, I come from Germany, although I live in New Zealand. I'm actually German. And I definitely come from this world, from this weird world. I'm a weird person in this sense. And the interesting thing was that only maybe 10 years ago, they started finding out that a lot of research was done on human beings, and particularly in the psychology field, in universities, of course. And many of the universities were attended by weird people. So I think 80% of all psychology studies were ever done with the subjects being weird. And they were not from any other, they didn't represent really the world, because in reality, weird people only make up 12% of the human population. So weird people are actually not representative. So all the research that had been done about maybe depression or any other psychological phenomena or even illnesses had been done with statistically non-representative people. And I'm saying that because it's really interesting. Who are the non-weird people? And the non-weird people, one of the things that weird people have in common is that people are very individualistic. They have, for some reason, and there is a whole book about it, and I'll put it in the chat afterwards. There's a book about why Western people became individualistic and their families became small, and they basically cut themselves off from the tribe. But if you look at many other countries, like I lived in South Africa, and the Maori people here in New Zealand, in the Aboriginal people in Australia, many other indigenous people that I know, in many other countries like China, I'm sure large parts of India, are actually collectivistic. They still think very much in group consciousness and we consciousness, and not like I, and my money and my house and my little family, but they're thinking in much larger structures. And that comes still very much aligned with Indigenous wisdom, which is my topic today. So I found this very interesting, and I wanted to introduce this concept so we start understanding the impact on the world. So one of the things that has happened is that these weird people, they have created most of the systems of the world. Business systems, education systems, health systems, government systems, etc., 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 technology, but they were not representative for the world. So I'm thinking of the weird people, like the people with the iOS. They have the weird operating system is like the iOS for the Apple devices, and they created all these apps: business, education, healthcare. But these apps are not running on this other operating system that's like the Android system, the more collectivistic cultures. And the apps are actually not running in the IT space where I come from. We wouldn't even try to run an iOS app on an Android phone. But we've been trying to do this for a very long time. And I think we're just learning now that there's so much richness in the Android system, in the indigenous people, but also in many of the other collectivistic cultures that are very evolved in their own way, that we can learn about what is their view of the world and how would it enrich the world if we have individualistic and collectivistic points of view together. And maybe rewrite the apps so they actually fit the Android operating system, because the one is not better than the other. They're just different systems, and together they're strong. So that is very interesting research. And at the end, when I finish my talk, I will put something in the chat so I can stay at the moment here. So if we're thinking now about indigenous people as a specific group within the collectivistic cultures, because they live in tribes and they need to look after it. I think of the Aboriginal people, they have survived together 50 to 60,000 years. We were talking earlier about this amazing ancient wisdom and, scriptures and that have been existing for thousands of years. Let's say 5,000 years. The Aboriginal people have lived 50 to 60,000 years in their current way of living, apart from the modern way where they've been tucked away in territories and so on. But their authentic way of living has actually sustained itself for that long a time. So they're probably the oldest civilization on Earth, and they have very, very old wisdom. And what I'd like to do is look with you, what are these core shamanic principles? So there is a researcher, Michael Harmer. He studied all the different indigenous tribes, and he started looking, what do they have in common? What makes up the belief system in that collectivistic or embedded, you'll see just now in this special culture, in this view of the world? Let's call it the operating system. So let's have a look together at these principles of the operating system of indigenous people. And that's just one research, but a very well-known and respected research. And unfortunately, that will be a bit of a big slide. I'm normally not into that, having a lot of text on slides, but I'll have it today because every single one of those principles builds on the next one. And I think it's worth for you to see them all. So in the core shamanism, which is one, as I said, one belief system where we have shamans that, connect with wisdom for the tribe, for example. So let's think of a nomadic tribe, and they're needing to decide if they're moving on, or how they're living, or any decisions that these tribes need to take. They're going back to this core shamanism. So in the belief of core shamanism, everything is made of energy. Everything's made of spirit. So I'm a yoga teacher, amongst others, and I often think of the prana and energy and all kinds of different forms of energy and where they're coming from. And there is a belief that everything is made of energy, and their energy is spirit and has spirit. So this energy is alive and conscious. It has an innate, almost like an intelligence, but this energy is definitely a living field. So everything, a tree, a flower, a rock, a human, an organization, a company, they're all alive and conscious. Everything that exists, a star, a sun, a moon, the Mother Earth, everything is alive and conscious. That is the belief. And everything is alive and conscious within a living systems field. That's a word I'm choosing. It's a living system, and it's an ecosystem, and it's all interrelated. It's one field. So you could say it's the field of oneness that we heard about earlier. So when we open to this interconnected field of energy, we, like the trees and the butterflies and the stars and the sun and the moon and the Mother Earth, we gain this deep, heartfelt empathy with everything and a reverence for everything that exists. Like I have that. You know, I see a butterfly and I'm in awe, and I look at the trees outside. You know, it's pitch black and dark, but I have these beautiful ancient trees that may be 300, 400, 500 years old. And I look at them and I'm in awe, and I'm in reverence, and I'm grateful that they're there, and they're my guardians. They guard my house, and they look after me like a grandmother or grandfather. And by having this attitude with the interconnected field, we live in harmony, and we live in right relationship with everything. So today in business, we're talking about, people, purpose, planet, and profit. But we're including now the planet. So this is a bit of a section where we're actually living in right relationship again, not just with the God of money, but in right relationship with everything that there is, particularly with humans and also the earth in this case. We haven't included the cosmos yet when we're talking about that. But because we are in right relationship, we will then also engage in right action. So we will behave ethically, or again, picking up on what we've already heard about how important ethics are, and ethics will become increasingly important in the business world. So now comes the funny thing. Human beings have the seemingly unique ability to unplug themselves from the living systems field. Dogs don't do it, butterflies don't do it, bees don't do it, trees don't do it, the moon doesn't do it. But humans have, for some funny reason, the option of thinking they're not part of the field, they're their own people, they can do their own thing. And that hasn't worked out also well. And because when you unplug yourself from this sense of empathy, we are not necessarily acting right anymore. And I think we can see how some things in the world have created outcomes that we've never intended, but it happened because we unplugged ourselves. We went out of the integration with the field, out of the interconnection. And that ultimately makes us ill as individuals, because we're not living right anymore, in right relationship with the earth. We're maybe not walking enough. We're maybe not breathing clean air. And I just yesterday actually watched a movie of David Attenborough about the effects that COVID had on the animals all around the world on Apple TV. And it's the most amazing effect all over the world on whales and dolphins and birds and penguins, and everywhere he shows one part of the earth after the other. And the amazing effects when the humans have stopped interfering, and how nature and Mother Earth and all her other creatures are actually reappearing and thriving, and even inventing new song, new sounds, new ways of relating. Because we've unplugged ourselves so much back into our houses that we're actually not interfering anymore with the living system. And so individuals have disconnected themselves Organizations have disconnected themselves because they can just destroy the planet, and it's not part of the balance and the profit and loss account. It's not part of the balance sheet. So therefore, it was very possible to unplug ourselves, which is luckily changing now. And there is, now measurements that allow us to re-plug ourselves back into the field, into the whole field, the holistic field, and we can measure with ESG metrics, for example. We can measure how well plugged in an organization is or isn't. And that has obviously affected the whole of the entire societies, and some more and some less, and they have more physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual issues than others. So it has unfortunately led to a lot of harm to others, the earth in particular, and the environment that, that's held on the earth. So healthy human beings is the philosophy of the core shamanism. Healthy human beings, they feel part of nature, they plug themselves back in. They're not feeling separate from it. They're not above it, they're not better than it. They're basically just part of it. They realize, they become conscious that they're part of it, which they've always been. They've just mentally unplugged themselves and pretended they're not part of the field. So this is deeply seated in many indigenous cultures. So if we are part of a connected field, and if we are interconnected, what does it then actually mean for business? Who are we then as people who work, as leaders? Who are our organizations? How are they interconnected, and how should we run them? What could we do with that? And so I'll just stop sharing, so because you've seen now these principles. And as you can see here at the bottom, it comes from a book that's called Regenerative Leadership. I'll show you now. This is the book, Regenerative Leadership. And it is just one of the many, many concepts in this book that this book brings together about how we can become leaders again that regenerate the earth rather than degenerate the earth. And there's a whole developmental theories and all kinds of other theories that are all coming together in this book to help us together to regenerate the earth. And that is one person at a time, one team at a time, one organization at a time, one society at a time. And some societies are doing more already, and some are not quite there yet in terms of regenerative. So maybe my last piece of weaving on this story from why should we look at indigenous cultures, because they're actually a large part of the wisdom that is still held in the collectivistic cultures, and that the weird people are slowly gaining back, particularly people who do personal development and spiritual development, like probably many here. They are re-owning and rediscovering this whole interconnected field, the relationship with earth, the relationship with the sun and the moon, the heavens, and maybe other dimensions that are around us, maybe even other beings, or definitely other consciousness in the, if you call it the morphological field, or if you, whatever you want to call it. However, we are tapping into this greater living systems field. So how do I practically apply that? So how do I turn this from the theory and these principles that we've just seen? How do I apply them when I work with companies? So I will just go through that part where I'm working with corporations on as a spiritual medium and as a spiritual mentor, where I see that companies are entities themselves. So let me just I'll just putting up my notes, so I go step by step as I'm progressing you through the way I have translated that. So for myself, I've translated it to say all individuals and all collectives are whole beings. So they all have a body, mind, heart, and spirit. So the interesting thing is that many companies are actually called corporations. And you think about it, we as humans, we are incarnated into a body with a mind and a heart. And companies are incorporated, and corpus also means body. So an organization is actually a spirit or a purpose or a being, an intention that has incorporated itself into a body, and it becomes a legal body. I don't know if you know, but here in New Zealand now, we have natural entities, bioentities that are legal entities. So we have a river that is a legal entity, and it can go to court as a legal entity and blame and have a court case against somebody who's polluting it, because it's become an entity. So this is very advanced, legals that are embracing the fact that a bioentity is an entity. So the Maori indigenous wisdom and the Maori indigenous knowledge about seeing rivers as living beings, as part of our ancestors, of the beings that are making up New Zealand. They said these are beings, so they need to be beings and they need to be legal entities. So now we have a river that's a legal entity, and more bioentities will follow. The first one was probably the biggest coup that we had to land. And so you can see a very living example of how this philosophy of the nature being actually real entities and have spirit and have consciousness and are alive, how it's actually coming into law. Now, these entities that are individuals or collective entities, I believe, have an intricate relationship with the whole field. Like I have that. And let's say if I take SAP as an example, because I spend a lot of time there, SAP has a purpose in the world. It's intricately connected with the field of life. It's intricately connected with the whole of the earth. They have offices all around the world. Their internet spans the whole world. Their solutions span the whole world. 77% of all business transactions run over an SAP system. The business of the world is touching SAP, and SAP is touching the business of the world. How can we say they're not intricately connected? It's an intricate connection with life. But then there's a bigger life around it. There's a cosmos. There is the earth. But then beyond the earth, beyond the atmosphere, it continues. And maybe there are even other dimensions. And how do we look into that? So I think these beings, also the collective beings, so organizations in particular, just like us, they have a purpose, they have a potential in which they can grow into, and they usually experienced through their passion. They want to experience something, they want to achieve something, they're driven by something. I think in my yogic terms, we're calling that tapas. And the tapas is the fire that drives us, but it drives us somewhere. It's a directed, intentional fire that drives us. So companies have that too, just like we have it as yogi practitioners and beings, so have companies. And these beings, I believe, they have energy systems, just like we have the chakras, and we have prana flowing through all our nadis or meridians or chi, however you want to call the life energy that flows. It flows through these different channels, and it's interrelating in the chakras, where there are like nexuses, like big train stations, where all this energy comes together and interconnects and informs each other, and then goes out again and comes back and interconnects. And we have geometries in our bodies, we have geometries in our spiritual fields. It's all very intricate. I see companies as being golden pyramids. I can see the pyramids, and I can see that their purpose sits on top of the pyramid, and we can look at that, we can connect with that. If we believe, like the indigenous people, that we are in an interconnected field on many, many levels, then we can connect with all of those things. And I also believe that these beings have these companies have a higher self. So just like I myself know I have a higher self, I have a part of myself that has more love and more wisdom. So between me, who wants to eat a cake, then there's already a higher wisdom in me that says you shouldn't eat so much cake. But then there's a much higher part of me that's even beyond me that I can connect with, and that has an even greater and wiser and more loving view on me eating cake. And it might say, you should eat cake when you need it to soothe your heart. That's what my very higher self would say. It has a greater love and wisdom. So what I'm finding interesting is if we assume that a company has a purpose and has a potential that they can grow into, and it has passion, and it has a higher self, and it is connected to the field, how do we then work with it? And how do we connect to this guidance that is available to us? How do we find that purpose? Rather than the board going away on a retreat, 7 people, 9 people, 10 people, going away for a 2 or 3 day retreat, maybe with an expensive consultant, and they come up with the purpose. But that is the purpose that lives in their mind. Is it the purpose of the organization? Is it the purpose of this energy being that wants to be on the earth and do something on the earth for humanity, or sometimes for the planet? People want to save dolphins, or, you know, organizations want to do all kinds of things on earth. So I work now, after I have integrated this indigenous wisdom of this interconnected field that is alive and that has spirit and that has intelligence and consciousness, after I have and energy, I am now looking at talking to this higher consciousness. I think a really good examples are the All Blacks. Many of you are probably rugby fans. And the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, has an amazing spirit. You can exchange all the players and the coach, but the All Blacks have a spirit. And then the new players come in, and they basically become the embodiment of that spirit. The All Blacks team has its own spirit, and the players are the embodiment. And that is a fascinating team to see, or organization, if you want, where you can see that the spirit is actually driving the entire operation, not the beings, not the individual human beings. And it's a very powerful thing. And the haka, being a very indigenous dance or expression of energy, is bringing the spirit of the All Blacks alive, and then it embodies the players, and then they're going out with that spirit. So you can see how the All Blacks, probably unknowingly, I'm not sure how conscious this whole process is, but we are talking about it. We're now conscious of consciousness in our conversation. We can work with that just like in other organizations as well. It doesn't have to be the All Blacks. So in reality, I do that by connecting with organizations and connecting with their higher self, their highest love and wisdom, their highest purpose, their passion, their true values, mainly love and wisdom, and anything that comes out of that, and help the organizations to actually re-embody that. So I'm using all this indigenous wisdom and have turned it into a way of supporting organizations to have greater interconnectivity in the world, positive impact, take their real place in the world for which they came, for which this organization or team or individual incarnated, incorporated, embodied. So one of the examples is I work with a very, very large mining company. And as the team of 200 leaders, that was a really nice exercise. It wasn't just 8 in a somewhere in an offsite meeting. It was 200 leaders work together to find their purpose. And what they came up with was, we exist to improve life and transform the future together. So it's a very beautiful purpose that they have found in their heart, with tears, with happiness, with celebration, with sadness as well for when they haven't done it. So we exist to improve life and transform the future together. When I went to talk to the higher entity and asked the higher self of this organization about their purpose statement, it became very clear that they said, we want to be a bridge between Mother Earth and humanity. We want to be a bridge both ways. We want to bring stones or coal or things to humans so they can build homes and bridges to meet each other, to shelter them, to feed them, to nurture them. But this organization should also bring resources back to the earth, because it's a bridge that goes both ways. So strategically, this would mean that instead of this mining company owning trucks that bring things out, trucks and trains that bring things out to humans, they could use this same network, logistics network, to bring resources somehow back to the earth, and find out how can they change their business model from a degenerative business model that's just taking things out to the humans, which is nice, but when nothing comes back, at some stage it will be empty. In Germany, there's no more coal, empty, just empty.
Sandra, we just running out of time. Would like you to sum up, please.
Thank you. So yeah, so that's kind of the inspiration I want to give you, that we all look into Indigenous wisdom and what it can teach you on a much greater level and deeper level and wiser level, so we can be more regenerative together and create a better world.
So thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for this insight. It was quite insightful, as well as, you know, this reminded me of the movie Avatar. I saw it a couple of years back, you know, so very similar kind of message. Thank you so